Hello everyone and welcome to yet another live coding and chill. I'm your host Johnny and I'm delighted to be here. I hope you're having a great day as well. It's sunny here in Barcelona, which is always great news to me. I am sun-powered, as you may know. Today we're keeping off with authentication. We're going to be providing even more authentication methods, login methods to our users. The previous series we've done was mostly static website. I'll switch to desktop view right away. And then we repurposed the end result of this series to make Goblin an app where you can find and search loot. And thanks to your suggestions, one of the suggestions actually was to add search and pagination to this. And then another suggestion was, how about login? How about the use as authorization and authentication, Johnny? So I was like, great. And we did that in the last episode. We provided some sort of account management and login with GitHub, which we can demo right away and see if it still works. You can see if it still works yourself by going to the links in the description and clicking around as much as you want. It's free. So we have this big continue with GitHub button, and because we already have an account, it just logs us in like magic. If we didn't have a GitHub account, if we didn't have the account with Goblin already, it would pass us along to GitHub, and then we'd see all the permissions, all the things we ask for from GitHub, which is the email address and avatar, and authorize, approve, and GitHub would bounce us back to the app here, which will take care of creating an account with our avatar, an initial name that we can adapt. More in-depth explanation of this, you can actually go along and implement this to your app if you follow the previous episode of this series. And today, the dream is more login options. So due to popular demand, we'll be continue with Google today. And Delight in the chat, it's been a while. Can you give an opinion about Lucia versus Auth.js? Pros and cons that pop into my head. I do have a good experience with both by now. So Johnnify.com, you can go and log in through there as well. That one is using Auth.js, but Goblin, the one we're using now, is using Lucia with Drizzle ORM. And I'm doing this exactly because I want to have opinions, I want to have experiences with all the popular methods to handle accounts and stuff like that. And so these things for you in the chat as well. In the previous stream, I also talked about this in the beginning, also including Supabase as well. Not to deliberate on this too much. So I would say, if you want least effort, maximum result, I would go with Supabase. Supabase, of course, is many other things and therefore can be more expensive. The Auth.js and Lucia itself is free after all, but Supabase does give you the Postgres instance. You get 2 free projects as well, if you don't have any others there, but it also provides storage buckets and auth solutions, which is what we're talking about. And the way they're doing auth and the way they've documented how they do auth, I think that's the least effort from you as a developer for the maximum result, in that I am able to log in my users in the app. It handles account linking and all of that for you. It does that very well. Auth.js falls on the middle ground, where it is trying to do a lot of the magic for you. So you have to take less effort as an engineer, more effort than Supabase, and their docs are much worse than Supabase, and they're still in beta, especially for the SvelteKit version of Auth.js, so they may get better. Hopefully they will get better. But that magic does come at an expense of flexibility that I actually wish I did have. So for example, I won't be implementing magic links for Johnnify at the moment, because the way they do magic links, they want to really fit into the way they're doing the other types of auth, the social login auth, and therefore I don't like it. When I want to do the magic links, I want a different flow. I don't want to redirect the user anywhere. I want them to have a message that says, check your email. That's surprisingly difficult to do with Auth.js, because They provide your SvelteKit components, your Svelte components that you can use in the UI. They provide the magic hooks for you. They do a lot of magic for you. But if you want to break out of that magic and be like, I want to do it my way, it's actually a lot more work. And Lucia, finally, is maximum effort, also doesn't have great docs, but you actually do understand in the end what you need to do, what we're actually doing when we're getting people to like GitHub or Google, and then when they get back, what do we store in a database? What are we validating? I guess with Lucia, you need to get much deeper into the weeds. It is maximum effort as far as these three libraries are concerned, but it kind of forces you to understand what you're doing. And therefore, if you do want a more custom experience, more flexible experience, it is the best one in that regard. So maybe hardest to understand and implement, but best for if you really want to be in control of what you're doing. Again, Supabase is a special case because in some instances you would be paying for it. So for side projects, maybe if you have too many, I wouldn't recommend it in that regard. But if it's Lucia and Node.js, I would go for Lucia at the moment. Then again, totally valid opinion to say, I don't want the unique thing in my app to be the auth flow. Every app has an auth flow. I just need it working. And then, you know, I guess that's the approach of Auth.js. They provide the components for you, the Svelte components. You just drop them in. It handles a lot of things for you. And that's it. You don't care about how you named your database columns. You don't care about anything. You just follow the instructions and it will work for you. So it's definitely valid. But for me, who can be very particular at times, I would say that I will be using more Lucia in the future. But we'll see. Let me know if this big answer led to even more questions, or if it actually answered a few things. So Delight comes back with, thanks for this. I kept using Lucia myself up until now. Oh, nice. You like the flexibility. Auth.js on your bucket list, and it's basically an old friend. So yeah, you kind of have experience with, you definitely have an experience with 2/3 of that stack. I would have a look at the Auth.js as well, just to see what it does. The biggest blocker for me is the magic link flow. If they provide a way to break out of their, it needs to do redirects when you want to work with magical links, I'd be fine. I'd be like, okay, you can use it. But especially if you already are familiar with Lucia and therefore understand how it's supposed to work, I wouldn't switch out. I would experiment with something else because it's always nice to experiment and see different approaches to solve the same problem. It always makes you better, I think. But for a real project, if I'm already familiar with Lucia, I would keep with Lucia because it does a lot for more flexibility once you know what you're doing. My doggy is here and agrees. She's wagging her tail in agreement. Right. So that's why we're doing Lucia today. What else should I mention? This project, we've also done a few projects with Auth.js in the past. The Next.js dashboard project was using Next.auth, which became Auth.js, and the SvelteKit dashboard project also was using Auth.js. If you don't want to particularly install these libraries, but have a look at how they're working, you can have a look at those. They're also doing email and password, which some people are asking for, so have a look at those. And if you want this code, the two dashboard projects, open source and free, if you want the portfolio, if you want the Loot Goblin project, if you want the Johnnify monorepo, if you want a SaaS monorepo, many things you can get with Johnnify Premium. Some friends are telling me, like, tell us the value, like, promote this more. So I'm doing my best here, even though I don't want to talk about it particularly much. I do honestly think this is huge value. Whenever I start a new project, I always start from a older project of mine, and now I've only been starting from Johnnify projects. And if my day rate is like 500 or 1,000 or however much it is, any project saves me at least one day of work, and then I can over deliver expectations because I've saved a day. I'll always say good things about everything. So check out this waitlist as a service idea. great, get into tech, build products like this, awesome products that save people time. They're saying here, if you do the design, the DB setup, the email setup, and cultivate at least manually 4 hours of work, I would say even more. But use this and it's only 20 seconds. And the pricing for this, where they have a deal, is like 16 for the starter process with some limits. $16, which again, awesome. You can build something like this as well. Maybe you can build it starting with the starter that we have here for a much, much lower price. But you get different things. This is the exact opposite. Like instead of having a service take care of your waitlist, you have a whole stack, which has its benefits, has its problems. Anyway, I consider Johnnify Premium successfully pitched. Today, we'll be doing the login with Google, which means that behind the scenes, I did need to do a few things to push the Google login screen in production. It turns out that you can use it in developer mode just fine. It's just that your users will be seeing a login screen that says, this is not a production app, or this app is not authorized, which is scary. And you will have lower limits on how many login flows will be successfully created and ended. But just to keep things thorough here, I did do a few things behind the scenes to verify this app and push it to production. If you didn't follow the login with GitHub previous episode, the login with Google, I can only imagine it's going to be very similar. At some point, we're going to need two variables. For GitHub, we had a GitHub client ID and a secret GitHub API key, let's say, and we'll need similar things for Google, Google client ID or provider ID or whatever you want to call it, and a Google secret. And to get those and authorized for production, they want two things. They want a terms of service link that looks kind of legit. So I publish this. Feel free to amend to taste. And a privacy policy link. So I've had those. I've created an app logo. I've validated the domain with Google Search Console as well, which just means that I uploaded a static HTML file that Google scrapes and it's like, okay, they're actually owning this domain. And with all of that done, I submitted the Goblin app for verification and it was approved. So today, if we make it live, if we make this work, then you should be able to go to the login screen. You should see the continue with Google button and you should be able to create an account with Google and say, awesome, it works. And again, follow along with me, implement in similar ways. But if you just want to double check the code, if you want to skip around in 4x speed, your live streams and just end up with the code as well, Johnnify Premium is the way to go. All right, so what we're doing today, covered. What did we pre-work to do the Google Auth screen look legit and be ready for production? We did it. And I also created two API keys, which if I open to edit, they actually will get leaked, which is one of the reasons why I created Goblin dev and Goblin. So if I leak either, I can just delete it and create a new one. Anyway, in here is also where you define where your callback URLs are. So in theory, we click the continue with Google button, we get the user to Google and we tell Google, send them back to this URL. And it needs to be one of the URLs with predefined, and where we want them to go back in production is auth callback Google, I imagine, because what we did before was auth callback GitHub. These are not magic by default, it's just a convention that I like to follow because following conventions is awesome and makes your problems more Googleable. If everyone is doing this, then you can search Google and be like, oh, you should be doing that as well. So follow conventions when you can. I think my musical dog has hit Siri and turned on the music now, which is cute, but I'll need to double check if it's right. All right, all good. She did indeed pull on the Siri orb, and then the music started playing, which is very cute, I'll say. Cool. So, with all of that done, maybe have a quick overview of what we're doing here. So we are logged in out. We're logged in now. Let's log out so we can find the login screen here. We have a continue with GitHub button. So in the login page, we have just a form. It doesn't have an action attribute, so it will hit the default action on the server side. And it has just the one button. Because it's a button inside the form, it's going to be a type submit button. When you click it, this form gets submitted. And therefore, on the server, it's going to hit the default action, which is generating some state from this article library that Lucia recommends we use for third-party logins, social logins. And then we create the GitHub authorization URL, redirect the user to GitHub after setting some cookies. So when GitHub sends the user back successfully, saying, all right, they validated, we actually know that it was the user we sent and there wasn't any security hacks going on. So it feels like today we'll want to do something similar. We'll want to refactor this default action to actually understand, are we trying to get the user to GitHub, or are we trying to get the user to Google? Because these are our options. And then later in the day, we'll also be handling multi-link login as well. We'll see how that goes. So this form will need to be doing something different if the user is clicking the continue with Google button. But first, let's make a continue with Google button. Done. Let's give some gap here. Gap. Different icon as well. So guess I need the Google icon, which I don't have. So let's show that as well. Which one do I like? Which one looks like modern Google? Let's say this one. Let's go to SVG to minify it. Great. And let's look at our GitHub icon. This file component. Call it Google. And paste in all of that. So now I should be able to bring in the Google icon. Bam. Google. Of course, if we click login, continue with Google now, the same thing will happen. As before, this default action will fire and will actually create a GitHub authorization link. So that's not great. So what do we want to do here? We've shown, because we also have like a waitlist newsletter type of thing, sign up here. We've seen how we can work with form data elsewhere, but maybe we can have a hidden value. There are two ways to do this. The lame way would be to have different forms for each one, and then each form hits a different SvelteKit action. Or have hidden inputs that have a different value according to which button you've pressed. But that'd be lame, because actually with buttons, you can give them a name like you can to input fields. So we can give it a name of provider. And if you then give them a value, you will be able to access this on the backend. So the value for this one will be GitHub, the value for this one will be Google. And the sweet thing with submit buttons inside the form is that the one you click is going to be the one that gets sent on the backend. So if we click the GitHub button, then the provider form data value is going to be GitHub. If we click this one, the Google button, the provider form data value is going to be Google. It's a not suite. And because we have a bit of a spec here, we can actually use Zod for this, for validation, and see how they handle string enums. Just like this. Any other ways to do enums? All right, they're saying do it with salt enums, so fair enough. So on the backend, let's say we have some providers, social login providers, which are going to be GitHub or Google for now, and then we're going to add Magic or whatever. And from our main server file, we can bring in the Zot import. And then we have this, and this is just an array, so let's call it providers. Maybe like this. I guess we could have this somewhere externally, and then in the UI iterate through this, but then it's like the logos as well, like too complicated. Let's do it like this for now. Why I'm doing this is because I want to parse whether this, whatever we get from the form, is actually an enum here. Hello, how you're doing? Yes, we're still on Loot Goblin part 7, I think. So we are beyond, we're just about like Harry Potter octology levels, like one more, and we make it about Lord of the Rings and Hobbit length now. Which I don't know, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? We're world building. Maybe I will switch to weekly streams and see if you're able to follow along in a bit more chill way, but please do not get the anxiety. There is a point, like if I was doing like only once a week or once a month, then it would feel like very doable to follow, and then maybe you'd get anxious. But now that I'm doing so many hours of content, it's like you'll never be able to keep up, so no anxiety. It's not realistic to keep up with all of them. Right, so here I have this provider's enum, which I want to validate somehow. And I think I should be able to save parse this, but who knows. we do want to get the form data for sure from the request. And then we want to async safe pass this. But that's not going to be the provider. That's going to be the validation. Bring in fail from SvelteKit, and then the validation data should actually finally be the provider. So, for example, just to see if that works, if in the UI we said that the Google login was actually Bing, and we click it, we should get an error on the backend. We should. Did we not? Do we soft fail? Because we're using an enhanced form, I think we just get a soft failure there. Maybe not. If we click the GitHub login, we do get logged in normally. But what actually happens when we do this one that actually fails? It's kind of interesting. I would expect we get this to the fail state. Do we make it here? Let's see. Yeah, we do get it. We do make it here, and we are returning a fail in the UI. But then the UI is returning nothing, I suppose. And even if we don't return, no, we must return. Let's double check. We need to return it. Don't know why we weren't in that other place. Because unfortunate. So that's a helper to return a fail object, I suppose. So now when we click here, we are getting the 400 correctly. And then it's up to us. We have some extra information in the UI to show a little error message, but we'll show that shortly. Cool. So if we make it to here, this is going to be one of our available providers. We know it's even TypeScripted in that is either GitHub or Google. Great. Great. So in the UI, let's give this the correct value of Google. And on the backend, see what we're going to do according to whether they choose GitHub or Google. It feels like we should be doing like a switch case here. In which case, we can be doing all of these things. I think the state, we can keep it out. Maybe we can also create the URL. just reassign it here. Actually, a native URL object. Fair enough. And then we'll direct there. Is that too complicated? Maybe that's. Just handle the redirect. And we also have the Google case where we'll be doing something else. What will we be doing? That's where we're looking into the docs. But very similarly, we're going to be creating a redirect URL for Google. So we have the Arctic helper provider, and we create an authorization URL the same way, kind of similar, but this time we need to specify the redirect URL, which was optional in the GitHub one, which makes me think that we should be creating this Google object inside here, actually. So maybe we just do it. Not sure. I think we have a providers helper file here where we create this GitHub object. But maybe instead of exporting GitHub, but we are actually using it in a couple of different places. Let's see, can we create this Google client without specifying the redirect URL just yet? Step by step here. So Google from Arctic, again, the client ID I've created behind the scenes and added it in my .env, .local and .env and all of that. And also in .env.test. So I've added a Google client ID and Google client secret, which, as discussed a bit earlier, you can get from your credentials dashboard, which I find Google Cloud easier to navigate than AWS, but still it's pretty bad, especially if you have quite a few Google accounts. It always thinks that like I'm a different user and then opens like different projects. Anyway, doesn't matter. We've created some credentials here for a web app. This gets us both a client ID and a client secret, which is what we need here. So we're bringing in these environment variables as private secret environment variables the way SvelteKit likes it. And then, yeah, it seems that this always wants the redirect URL, which is fair enough. Okay, get Google provider. We'll need to export a little method here. Which takes our direct URL. Callback URL, I'll call it callback URL. And then passes it along here. So in our server here, in this block, we can create our Google client. With that's the callback URL. What's the callback URL gonna be? So this is gonna be dynamic because now we're using it in localhost, but then we may be using it in a preview environment, and then we'll be using it in production. And that's why I don't want to hard code. To keep things simpler, we could have just say that this is always HTTPS, loot Goblin, blah, 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 whatever this should be. But it's not. Yeah, so maybe this is like the root URL actually. And then even the root URL, it gets us to, it adds auth Google callback. Auth callback Google. Copilot half helping, half messing around. All right, so here, this needs to dynamically pass whether we're on localhost or a preview deployment in Vercel or wherever we are. And that we get thanks to the URL that gets passed in by SvelteKit in everywhere really, in your load methods, in your actions, in your server methods, handlers, all of them get the URL, the current URL that the user is hitting this endpoint with. So if we pass the OAuth in here, we should be fine. This throws, let's say break, just in case, I guess. Sure. So similarly, to what we were doing before, get the authorization URL from Google. What is it actually called? Is it called something different? It needs a code verifier. Sure. Which is something that Arctic has. We just need to bring it out, I guess. This is the thing I was saying about the dogs. I think even Lucia has an example of this, of how they create a code verifier here. Yeah. So here, now we have a code verifier that's only used in the Google case, so that's fine. And then we can pass in the option for the scopes, which I guess we want a profiling email, because why not? Always ask the least you can, of course. But I've already been approved for those two, because we'll have user submitted content, we'll have people's avatars alongside their loot. We have a use case. And of course, we always need the email, but it does make sense. Cool. So after that, I think we should be doing the same thing we're doing with GitHub, that we need to store the OAuth state somewhere in a cookie. Only save it for like a little amount of time. 10 minutes, so not that little. And then we are actually finally able to redirect. To Google, and then we'll see what happens. So interesting that ESLint thinks that we should be breaking, but actually, in reality, we know that we'll never get there. Yes. Because this one throws an error to get the redirect, so not sure. If we don't redirect here, things that this is sometimes not assigned. No, it's fine. Okay, so maybe that's a better way to do it. Cool. I wonder if we can just keep this the same way. Let's see what our callback is doing. So we have a GitHub server handler. Not there. This one, which gets this cookie. Should we just store it in as OAuth state and move on with our lives? I think so. Just to keep things simpler. So all our provider switch case is doing is creating this redirect URL. So we could have a helper method at some point, which like generate redirect URL for provider, and then you do this logic here, and it's easier to test as well, to unit test if you want. I think that's fine. I don't think there is any way where it's less secure to keep this name the same versus having a different one for GitHub or Google. And it would override the cookie, so it will always be the last one you collect. I think it should be fine. Cool. So after we've done this, they should get back to not here, because this is specific to GitHub, and I wonder if we should preemptively refactor this or not. Not sure at the moment. I think in my agenda I said that we'll refactor later, but we'll see, like refactoring for a common use case. But for now, let's just copy paste. Like, let's say we have Google, we have GitHub, and we want one just for Google. And we'll refactor later, just use the one. They do the same things here. Google should be sending the user back with this, with a code there, because that's what an auth to flow does. And can also ask, do we need the same code verifier? So that's interesting. We may need to keep this one in the state too. Maybe not, we'll see. Yeah, they want us to store the code verifier here as well, interestingly enough. Interesting how the GitHub case didn't need this. We should always have it there, so that's fair enough. And the parameters are the same, but of course we're storing the code verifier. And probably this should be constant somewhere in our app, so we know to get them from the right place. So in the Google case, we also want to get this back. Great. And then we want to validate the authorization code that we get back, which also gets us back user tokens as well. This can be a refresh token if we don't do something different for offline support, but we'll talk about this in a while. The thing with Google is that they only give it to you once. If you want to get it again, then the user needs to revoke access to from your app, which is a bit of a hassle, to put it mildly. But yeah, here Google is going to be this. Get the URL as we sent. Have it here already. And then Google validates authorization code. This is the thing that also needs the stored code verifier. And I imagine that in the tokens we have an access token here. Let's see what they show there. Yeah, it looks like that's true. All right, but now instead of fetching the GitHub user, we're in the Google flow, we need to fetch the Google user, which we kind of do like this. So let's see where we've put this helper method. Let's create a fetch Google user. And this one, yes, it's quite similar. It's just a URL that's different. But of course, I don't actually know what this returns. We'll need to double check. I'm sure they have docs somewhere, but we'll find it out. And so the server here Did I name it differently? I did not. I did now. And this guy, I can only imagine it has a user ID. But let's have a look. It's the user info endpoint. What does return? Blah, 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 blah. Too much blah, blah, blah. Just want the schema. Payload, what do we have? Who knows? It will be faster to just console log it. So let's log the console, the Google user. And what we were doing with GitHub Flow, we'll need to do a similar thing. We're checking, has this person already created an account with us? Have they gone through this flow before? If yes, we just log them in. If not, we create the database records that we need, and then we log them in. So on the users info, we'll need a more generic one, find by a provider ID, I suppose. Because if we remember our schemas, our auth schema here, we have the users table, great. We have the sessions table, also great. But we have a providers to users table, and this is the providers ID, which can be on the GitHub now, so we can update this to also have Google, and that's what we should be using with Zod, actually. Glad I looked. And then this provider user ID is the user ID that the specific provider has for that user. So Google has my ID as ABC. This is what will be appearing here. And this is the ID for the Goblin app. We know this user as 123. Google knows this user as ABC. And GitHub knows them as FZ, JMagrippis, whatever. It's not a handle. I should have said random numbers and letters, but it's hard for me to make up like with UUID before on the fly. Not quite that robotic. Anyway, this makes me think that now this is provider agnostic. So this should be fetched by provider ID. And should actually be string. The GitHub is kind of different in that they use integers, but we'll convert it later in the process. But we should also be supplying the provider here now, interestingly enough. So maybe this becomes find by provider. Sure. This should be this. So just give me the provider here, I suppose. So we need a find by provider. Find by provider. All right, so the only place where we've used this before didn't refactor the name. So we actually have two places where we use this. In the GitHub callback, we save find by GitHub ID, but now we should be saying find by provider. But a provider has provider user ID of GitHub, provider ID of GitHub, indeed, and provider user ID, GitHub user ID. So that should be happy. And we can turn this into a string, and then it should be happiest. Great. And we're actually doing it again. Interesting. Ah, it's the Google one. Okay, so that's the new one. So this one, find by provider, the provider will actually be Google this time. It's hard-coded to start with. And the provider user ID should be this. And I can only imagine that this returns an ID that's actually a string, but we'll find out. We'll log it out here. Right, and if we have an existing user, then we just create the session. All good. If we have not, then we need to create the user in a database. Everything else should be the same, but I really want to know what this returns to us, this user info endpoint. Like, does ChatGPT know? Let's see if they know. So we have, you know, a bit of a guess. My wife's here. Yay. My dog will be delighted. Is it even possible to not have a verified email? Maybe. Ah, so it's sub. Great, that kind of sounds familiar. I think they also provide an ID and a sub, to be honest. But hey. We'll find out if they're true. But this sub one is important. They have a name. They have a picture, supposedly, not an avatar URL. And whether the email is verified, which may prove to be important. So here, the Google user seems to have email and name just fine, but it has a picture for the avatar URL. And it also has, it's also on the sub property. Sub property. So I think that's it. I think now, if we click the button and we try to log in by Google, let's confirm like GitHub still works. It does. Will Google work? Great. I'll log in with a different person. Sign up for this guy. They have links to the privacy policy and terms of service, which is why they wanted to verify that I have them. Looks like it worked. Not the avatar URL, though. We did get the email. It seems like we kind of made this up. But no, it is here. Interesting. So we get back a sub, indeed, which is a string, even though it's numbers. Interesting. We have the name and stored in a weird way. They have email and email verified locale, which we're not going to use. And they have the picture, which is fair enough. And it seems to work. So what did we actually store here? It looks like it's something. Alright, not sure why it didn't work. First time, but it looks correct. Yeah, unclear. And logged in as this different person. Okay. So anything else we may want? I don't think so. ChatGPT GitHub Copilot was correct. So sub picture name email third. Sub picture name email and email verified. We care about those. I think that was a grand success. So if I sign out now, I can still log in with GitHub. Different user, different avatar. If I sign in with Google, I can select the provider. And then looking with this, the quality of this picture is shocking. But I guess, you know, if you look at it small enough, fine. Shocking. It's only Google. sign out, login again. Thanks for sign out. Yeah. And login with GitHub. The other one, sign out. Seems like I may need a little to work this time. Login with Google, ask, bam. All right, works. Great, grand success, confetti, like, subscribe, all the good stuff. But now, what happens if I click login with the email address that I already have? So if I log in with Google and try to log in with this one, t@mangrebus.com, which is the one I've already logged in with GitHub, do things blow up? Probably. So let's take care of that. It's especially important because it does happen to me that I go to a website, I log in, and I can't quite remember, did I use a magic link? Did I use GitHub login? Did I use Google login? Which Google login did I use? It gets a bit tricky. So it's nice when the app doesn't really care. Anything else we should talk about? The thing we didn't talk about was getting refresh tokens back, which allows you to do things in behalf of the user more easily. That's why I guess they call it like access type offline. You can have your server do things like import your calendar, for example, without you having to do anything explicit. So if the use case calls for something like that, I do choose the access type offline option. You may see it in apps that say connect your Google account or your calendar, and that's what they do. They get this access type offline token back, and then they use that refresh token forever, both to log you in and to do things like read your calendar. But it does have a higher problem rate because Google only sends you this refresh token once, as I mentioned before. So if you have a bug in your code and you don't store it, then you cannot find it again. The user will say, oh, my calendar is not syncing, what can I do? And you'll need to tell them, you need to go to your Google account and revoke the access you gave us and then log in again because I fixed the problem. So not ideal. So we won't be doing it today. If today our goal is login with Google, we don't need to worry about that. If you worry about that and you want it for your app, let me know and we may build it soon enough. So as always, I like to show things that are useful. So let me know if you're wondering about it, if you want to implement something like that, and I will do it. Until then, login with Google just works. Next, we want to link those accounts. As I mentioned, if I try to log in with the email I've already logged in with GitHub, who knows what's going to happen? So let's resolve this first, and then we'll make the logic more common, I think. So let's see what Lucia has in their guides for account linking. Once we get the user back, it is also requesting all the user's emails, but only looks into the primary email of the user and confirms whether that's a verified email or not. And then, if there is an existing user, what do they actually do? I guess it's the same thing. So what they're actually doing is just confirming that this is a verified email and only then creating the new user. No, they're also checking, do I have a user with this email? Of course. Of course. So yeah, let's double check what we were doing. not in the search bar, Johnny. The command palette. All right, so we validate the code that we get back. Fair enough. We fetch a Google user. We don't need to log this anymore. And then we see if we already have that user logged in or not. And if we have them with that provider, that's fine. But if not, now we're just creating a user every time. But this is where we'll be adding something. This is where we'll be adding a check to see if we actually have a user with that email already. All right, that's it. That's what we want. And they do suggest, did I dream this? Maybe. No, that's a different thing. We've preemptively added the email for the user before, so that's fine. But it's in this case where we blindly just create the user if we don't already have them for this specific provider. But we may have them because they logged in with a different provider or with a magic link. So first, like we should be logging as the user logged in with a different provider before. That's what we should be checking first. Yeah. So if they logged in with this provider before, great, no need to do anything else. If not, first we should check, do we actually have this user? What was naming is hard, so should we rename this with existing user with provider? This is just a user ID, so that's fine. So we can call this just existing user. So we need a find by email, indeed. We need a user repo find by email. And so let's go to our interface again. And if we do have them, then it just inserts the extra provider. If not, it also creates this. And it's doing the transaction last time. We had a bit of a problem generating this in a transaction, but just run the migrations again instead of using Drizzle's push feature. Just ran it through migrations, made it work, if I remember correctly. So that's fine. So find my email method. I wish I could name that it returns ID. So it should be similar to this one. We just want the user ID, which will be, we'll just look in the users table this time, get the ID from there, from the users table, where just one case, user's email is the given email. If there is a result, we return the ID back. Great. All good. So in the Google case, we have this. if there is already an existing user, just add this provider. Else we do whatever we're doing before. But in any case, the user ID should be a string. So this case where we can't find the user with that email should be fine. But here, with the new method yet again in our user's interface, method to add the provider. Hello Renato in the chat. I'm very happy with my streams and videos, especially when I get comments and people watching them, so thank you. Moved from Angular to Svelte. Angular was my first like modern front-end framework. Hello from Croatia. Hello from Barcelona and Catalonia in Spain. And Angular was really good, but we're talking like 15 years ago now. And it was Angular, React, and Svelte as the frameworks I've used the most in my life. That was my journey. So it was React to Svelte, really not straight from Angular. But yeah, Angular was really good. And lots of easy ways to create mobile apps as well, with a tool called Cordova. I don't know if you're familiar with that, which I'm sure has caused quite a lot of people to have the idea that, oh, web view apps are very bad. So not the most performant ones, but it got things delivered fast, for sure. Great forms. I remember from using Angular back in the day, like the big feature was, oh, you can see whether a form is valid, and if it is, then you make the button active, and then the user can submit, or if not, it's disabled. It was like, wow. With Ionic, yeah, the Ionic framework, I've used it quite a lot. But yeah, Angular was hot. So what should I call this method? I have the user, and I want to add just one provider to the user. Have add provider to user. And I guess all I need is the user ID. You're one of the minority who doesn't really like React. Well, I think a lot of the crowd, and what I was feeling as well, lots of people are getting experience in React fatigue. And maybe like 5 years ago, people were saying that React is like the new jQuery. And back then I was like, no, that's, that's not remotely true. But now 5 years later, I can kind of see it. Very often in Stack Overflow, like you used to go and search for a question, and then the answer is going to be like, oh, with jQuery, you dollar whatever. And that's how you do it. But I don't want to do it like that because I don't use jQuery now. It's like 20 years later. And I can see the same thing happening with React, where someone asks a straightforward question, and the answer is, you know, with React, you need to do this, add this JSX, add this whatever. Not to say that React is bad itself, but sometimes the question is, how do I do this? And they want a vanilla JavaScript answer that's going to work in 20 years, or maybe, you know, 10 years or 5. And React is so popular that you're gonna get, this is how you do it with React. And then you're like, but I don't use React, and you feel bad. Only you don't, you feel awesome because you're using Svelte, and Svelte is awesome. Right. Enough like mild takedowns of React. React cuts in strays. Here, let's send the provider to the user. I think we just need the user ID and the provider. Do we need anything else? Probably not. Let's double check. Here, what do they do? They just need the provider. Right, the provider and the user ID. Let's do it like that. So user ID, that's how we know the user, the ID we have in our app, and then the provider. Let's do it like that. Fine. And then return nothing. Tell us nothing. And let's implement this. My favorite Angular thing was the dependency array. So dependency injection, I always say, is kind of tricky in JavaScript, not like a first class solution. It was never thought of it to be the case. It's not like it use with like frameworks in Java or PHP like Laravel or Rails. And Angular tried to do dependency injection, but in order for it to work when you minify the code, you needed to pass in the dependency array, so it would know that the first argument in this method is supposed to be like your user's repository. I'm kind of reminded of this because we are kind of doing dependency injection, but in a weirder way. Anyway, no more asides. Let's implement this method. We can do it. Should I ask Copilot to do it? Maybe. Yes, dependencies and modules. And it's interesting because if someone who knows nothing about Angular will see this, and I saw this and I was like, this is insane. Why would you do this? And then you look into like even the most insane looking things, they have like a reason. It's like, oh yeah, when you minify the code, you aren't able to magically just get this. So there is a reason for the insanity. So it's not like people weren't doing their jobs well. But, you know, at some point you're like, I'd like to use something that looks less sane by default. That looks more sane by default. I don't know, depending on what you like, I guess. All right, so we're almost there. Are we using the providers to users here? Yes. Now let's do the insert the other way around. It's this one. We got it. So the provider and the user ID. Done. All right, so that should work. However, how sure are we that the email is correct or not? And since it's Google and GitHub, like I'm pretty sure that they've done their how do you call it? Their due diligence to validate whether the user owns that email or not. They just send you an email and then you click and that's it. And especially if you're using Gmail, it feels like they'd know. But there is that email verified attribute that we should sanity check. So, and especially if you use other third-party providers, social auth providers, you can create your own social auth provider, like OAuth 2 provider that confirms the spec, and maybe you won't be checking emails. So depending on which providers you use, you should be more cautious of whether they're actually verifying their email addresses. And if they expose a system of whether the user has verified their email address or not, then it's a good sign that they probably have verified this. So let's not shoot ourselves in the foot and actually sanity check whether the user, that email is verified. So in this case, we are saying that the user has successfully gone through the Google Flow. They haven't gone through the Google Flow before, but we have a user with that email address in the database. So in this case, let's validate if Google thinks their email is legit. And if not, let's throw an error. That's what they suggest here, I suppose. And we'll see what we can throw in the UI just for catching. Guess we're catching the error anyway. So what should we do? Because it would be an unexpected error. So again, in this case, before we associate this provider to the user, we want to say, but have they verified? And throw an error. But if we do throw an error, so if that throws, we can check error message. Let's say includes or contains or whatever. So in the UI, the user would at least see that that's the problem instead of calling you and being stuck. That's the reason I'm doing this. But if it's not this problem or this problem, then like we've done something wrong on the server. That's why we're 500 in. Right. So with all of that, it feels like if I try to log in with Google with my GitHub account, I should get to the GitHub login. So let's log in with GitHub. Let's call this GitHub. It has my face from Corfu. I don't know where it was there. Paxos, Adipaxos, an Ionian island in Greece. So let's see. This is production, so it won't have the login with Google yet. Signed out, login again. If I log in with Google with my j@macreapis.com account, which I've logged in with GitHub again, I should see my existing account. Let's see. First time I'm authorizing this via Google, so that's fine. It worked. Hey, if you want me to call you that, call me that. So boom, done it. Accounts linked. So this email, all good. If I hadn't verified my email with Google somehow, then that would crash and I would get an error message. But that's something that I'll probably like finagle with offline and then come back and tell you this is how I tested this, because it would take me a while to figure out how to best test this. Problem is, what if I had done it the Google way first and then done the GitHub login? Well, then we'd have a problem, because I've only updated the Google callback, not the GitHub callback. And I don't particularly want to keep those two things in sync by copy and pasting. Sometimes copying and pasting similar code is fine. It's okay. It's maybe the best way to go. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes you just give yourselves two opportunities to mess up. Or more opportunities to forget that when I update this, I should also update this. So we will move on to the refactoring step. Yeah. It's a coffee for inspiration. So let's recap. Sign out. Login. I see these two fellas. Continue with GitHub, continue with Google. Great. The login page looks like this. I don't iterate through the list here. I could have like a list of providers. But I don't know. This feels fine to copy paste. On the backend, we do have the one default method that gets the provider based on the button you clicked. That's great. So that's already refactored. I guess getting the URL could be refactored too. A get authorization URL by provider. Maybe that's a better place. Let's see. So we have this create Google provider method, but what if we had create callback URL, and it takes the provider ID, which is provider ID, and the root URL. Great. And then we have the switch case. it needs a state as well. So yeah, I don't like it anymore because it does have a few things. Don't like this anymore. I think that's fine. I think having this switch case here is fine. So these things are the same. We don't actually need this if we're doing the GitHub thing, but that's fine. It's gonna expire. It's not the end of the world. So that one didn't really need refactoring, I'll say, but then Google or GitHub will get us back to auth callback GitHub or Google. And these two things, maybe we can refactor into a dynamic single endpoint. And with SvelteKit, we can capture this by using magic brackets and then the name of what we want to capture. And this will be available to us as route params. So let's see, the one we kept most up to date was Google. So let's see if we can refactor this. Actually, and the provider ID would be is params a real thing? So provider ID we can actually validate, and like we did in our login method. And we can do the same thing here, it's fine. Users repo interface. We could keep the providers enum there too, like the Zod enum. Should we? I'll say yeah. Keep it in the one place. My dog is sleeping and barking and like that. Oof. Hopefully thinking of running always makes me happy. To think that he's thinking of playing and running on the fields while I'm validating form fields. So all of this I do actually want to steal and reuse here. Pass the provider ID that SvelteKit is going to magically make available for us. Okay, but it's not a form action. I think let's return error. Yeah, we'll use it elsewhere. And then we have the provider ID. Oh. Maybe call it validate it already. Or no, just get it from the params and pass it in here. What does that achieve? That achieves that if we go to auth callback, whatever, then we get the 400 error, whatever is not available login provider, or if like you're trying to log in with Discord, maybe in the future we'll have it, but now not. But if we do try to log in with Google or GitHub, it will move on. But of course, I'm not providing code and all of these things that Google and GitHub will be providing. So we get a different error in the end, but at least people can't like just go to a provider we don't have. Great. So that's step one. Then we get the code, we get the state, we get all of those things. If not, we get to this error that we had before. And then we are at the Google specific stuff, which we'll want to abstract to handle either Google or GitHub, and in the future something else entirely. So, and mostly it's like this logic that it's like, oh, I want to find this user by their email, and I don't particularly want to write this in two places. So that's why I think it's going to be worth it. So we validate the code and then like we fetch the user, like fetch user from provider. Is that all we're doing? I think so. Then maybe these need to conform to like our user. I guess that makes sense. We have different methods for fetch GitHub user and fetch Google user, and we want like a fetch user from provider that uses either. And I don't know where exactly I would put it, but it feels that's the first step. That's the first thing that we want to refactor. Get us to the login screen, because that's just nicer to look at. Maybe the email verified is fine. Can you see the steam going on in my head? I think. So we fetch the user from Google, and then what do we do with the Google user? We use the ID, but we call it the sum because that's how Google knows it. Then we use the email, which is the same. Then we use an email verified as well. And then we use a picture as the avatar URL. So it feels like we can abstract those things. For sure. And we are also doing the validation, I guess. Is that fine? Maybe. So let's create a validate and fetch user. Kind of makes sense. And maybe this method validate and fetch user returns select user did this before. So ID, name, email, avatar URL. I don't like it. Let's declare a type. Social login user, provider user, I guess. Needs to have an ID, a name, an email, and an avatar URL, and an email verified. This validate and fetch user. And fetch provider user. How many more names can I add to this? Who knows? And I want to give this a provider ID. And then what? And then we need a switch case on the provider for sure. But how exactly would we do it? Who knows? And the promising. A little map in there. Cool. And for GitHub, I guess something similar. Ooh. We can even cast this string immediately. An email verified true. Interesting. We just assume it's true. But with GitHub, we need to do something else actually. Here, so that we're hitting a different email address as well. Interestingly enough. So we need an email verified. That's our problem. How would we do that extra request? Should we be checking for every email in the world? Maybe. I guess the response from GitHub doesn't have whether the email is verified, right? Let's double check that. Yeah, it just has the email. Emails endpoint? Nah. Emails endpoint. Like quite a few. Is it ever true and false? I guess not. Trying to see if they have any other docs about this. Should this be doing the mapping? And that's it? Maybe. But then it's a bit roundabout. But it could be private. I guess not. Anyway, what am I thinking? I'm thinking that I want GitHub user emails, exactly. And maybe let's... Should we do it here? Maybe. Is GitHub user email verified? Create this method. I'm thinking to myself, just keep coding. Is GitHub user email verified? Is GitHub primary user email verified? Who knows? Is GitHub primary email verified? Let's call it this. And we want to hit, I guess, this endpoint. What do we have here? This one. And do this crazy logic. We're getting our second wind. And we have the access token, great. And then we get all the emails. And the emails response is going to be this, right? An array of email verified primary visibility. Should return boolean, and here this should be email response and type of letters. Yeah. And now just return false. Just return false. Or I guess we return primary email and primary email verified. That's true, we're happy, right? Flip it for TypeScript to be even happier. And great, so we have this is email. Is GitHub primary email verified? Check. Check is GitHub primary email verified. Too many words already. Anyway. Is email verified would be, I will call it check, actually. I will call it check. Longest name in the word. All right, cool. Definitely don't want either of these. So then we return this name, email verified. Good. And we can make those two requests in parallel because we're cool like that. All right, so validate and fetch provider user. Great. The Google case kind of straightforward because we do know immediately whether they verified their email or not. With GitHub, we do need to do 2 API calls. That's what took us a bit of time here. But we got there, and those are the only 2 possible cases for now. We have these 2 providers. So great. And always returns social login user. Great. So we need to go to our dynamic server method, this one that takes any provider ID. And here, instead of fetch Google user, we fetch, we validate and fetch provider user. But it's all lies because we're not validating anything. This is just the fetch provider user, I guess. Whoops. We need extra steps. So we haven't validated this yet. I guess we just need a way to get the provider here. But this one needs a code verifier, while the other one doesn't. So I don't particularly want this method to do both after all. So let's rename it. To fetch provider user. But we do need to validate first. So this method, which we get from somewhere, SvelteKit is flipping out, doesn't allow me to get there anymore. It should be in this directory. So in this one, I want to create a validate, maybe authorization code, maybe kind of makes sense. Like these two things I want to happen, but regardless of whether it should be Google or not. So I guess validate authorization code really. The autocomplete is flipping out. Maybe a little reload. Too many errors in this page. That's a string and a string. Nothing crazy. It does return something specific. Maybe it just returns a string, which is the access token. Maybe. Let's see. So validate authorization code. I guess it's a thing. Is it a string? Yeah. And gotten a lot of use of this case. But we need the URL as well. So that's quite a lot of things we need actually. As an option, as an object. So if it's GitHub, kind of straightforward. we do what we did here. Just GitHub validate authorization code. That's it. Copy it. Copy hardware. And return token access token. And that's it. In case Google, well then we need to do different things. In the Google case, we need to create a provider. Just 2 lines instead of 1, not the end of the word. All right, so we have this dynamic validate authorization code. Set to put here. We'll only have an access token. Provider ID would be this. Root URL would be URL origin. And then the code will be this, and the code verifier will be the stored code verifier. And I think that's good. Don't need that anymore. And the access token, we just have it here. Great. Provider ID dynamically from the parameters. This is ID now, and if we have an existing user ID, then we just create their session in cookies, put them there, and it's all good. If not, then we check whether they have their email verified. Let's double check this. If they've already logged in with this specific provider, we just set some cookies and they're logged in. Done. Nothing to worry about, nothing whatsoever. If not, then we check, do we have a user with that email in general? Because if so, we have this user already, but they haven't logged in with this specific provider before. So the case we showed was I had an account created with GitHub login, and now I'm clicking to log in with Google with the same email address. That's my primary GitHub email address. So do we have a user with that email? If we do, then we see, like, does the that user who looked in with Google have a verified email? Like, have they verified that email that we used to check if we have a user with that email? Is it verified with the provider they use now? If not, then we tell them, well, you haven't verified this email, so just crash. If you want to log in with that method, prove that you own that email to those people. Which is all good. And here, if they have verified their email, which is the expected case, because I think with Google and GitHub, you have to have verified your email. Like, they send you a link in the beginning and you have to click it, login. So I think they're always verified. Anyway, then if it's logged in with a different method, now we need to add this specific provider they're trying to log in now as an available provider to them. So we add a record for this user and this specific new provider. Great. Next time they go through this flow, they'll get to here. We do have an existing user ID because we've added these records now in the database. Great. Else, we need to create this user from scratch. And once we've done all of these things, then we set the cookies yet again. Which is similar to what we're doing here, but I guess we already have like the user ID. All right, so huge method, 110 lines, not too bad. I think this means that I can delete these bravely and trust that this provider will just work. This magic method will just work. Let's put it on the big screen and see where we get. All right. I'm not logged in. Can use either one. Let me know in the chat which one you want me to try to work with. I'll try GitHub because it's the fastest one. Unexpected error. So they get here, great, in the GitHub one, but we get to this case, unfortunately. This case, I think. And what do we get? Emails find is not a function. What? So this thing, is it like nested in emails or something? What do they claim? What does GitHub claim it is? They say it's an array. Maybe we didn't authorize, didn't pass the access token correctly. Let's see, try again. Not found. Did I pass the access token? Yeah, we did. Is this the correct endpoint? Requires authentication. Great, makes sense. Let's curl this. Not found. Do we need the user email scope? Maybe. Let's double check. So we have this architect thingy with GitHub. Probably need this. Was that the problem? Let's see. Looks like it. So now we want their email addresses because we're validating whether they have them, and then it's fine. Okay. Right, so login with GitHub now works again. Logout. Double check. Login with GitHub works fine. Login with Google. You select, we have this person, Johnny Google, great, works. And we have this person with two providers, one with GitHub, great. And that one works too. All right, solved, refactored, not too bad. What else could we be doing? I think that's it. I think this is it. And I think I may let the magic links come on Friday, given we're like 2 hours in. Sometimes with like 4 and 5 hour streams, but let me know if I should continue today or hit the magic links immediately. I did do some setup with the simple email service with AWS, but we would be using recent today, I do believe. But that's already pretty cool, I would say. Let's double check what we've done. What did it sense here, if anything? Yes, Google Client ID, Google Client Secret. This could be like public Google Client ID, but just left it hidden. And I did upgrade some dependencies just before the stream. We've added the Google icon when logging in with Google. We've added a few methods, one of them being the one which hits the GitHub user email endpoint and checks whether their primary email is verified. I guess it's like we're being a thorough type of thing. But we should only be getting in this case. So that's kind of worrying. Let me double check. Like, why are we even in this case? Why are we checking this? Because we're fetching the provider user, I guess. Because we just want the user ID, but since we're here, I guess we could be validating the emails there. Yeah, just one extra API call we didn't really need before, we're doing now, but it's fine. So here we also fetch the user emails when logging in with GitHub, which we don't really need to do, but I guess it's fine. What else? So if we have this existing user, just log people in, else we do quite a lot of stuff. So let me try another one. Let's try Johnnify Tech. Still works. Great. So this is the case where we do have the email as well. But I guess the final one you'll be checking in production. People, lovely people in the chat, and what's in this in the future. Because now that we're doing the account merge, then I cannot actually check this. But it should work. It was working so far. So yeah, this check is GitHub primary email verified. We actually do this every time they log in with Google, with GitHub, but it doesn't happen that often because people do stay logged in to our app for a while. And it doesn't throw an error or anything, it just returns whether they've verified their email, their primary email or not. So that's fine. And we've created this fetch Google user method, which gets the Google endpoint with an access token yet again. And the fetch provider user, which uses the fetch GitHub user from before, the new one that checks the email for validity, and the fetch Google user method, and it all maps them to a type of user, our social login user that we understand throughout our app. And here, we just had the GitHub provider here. The Google provider needed a bit more finagling because it needs to be given the callback URL. And now I'm doing localhost in production. It should be the production URL lootgoblin.versal.app, I think. Check the link in the description. And we have one method that validates the authorization code according to whether it's GitHub or Google. We did this a lot. But it now means that if we were to add a third social login like Discord or something, it should be easier because now we've successfully refactored to be provider agnostic. We're hiding the specific method in the edge cases, in the switch cases, but it's not that much. Like we should be, like the bulk of the code is this magic auth callback, provider ID as a parameter, server out, and that one we shouldn't need to touch ever again. So if you want us to implement a third provider, let me know in the comments, and in the next episode where we'll probably do magic emails, I'll also do this in the end and see if it's quick or not. Validate that too. So yeah, validating the authorization code, fine. We've added a couple methods in our interface for our user repo. We're adding a provider to a user that has logged in with a different provider before. We've added a way to find a user by email. And we've refactored find by GitHub ID to become find by provider, so it will work with GitHub or Google or whatever we add in the future. Great, we implemented these changes to our interface. All good. And we fixed this problem that I had. You need to return the fails. So that's kind of confusing that for actions you need to return stuff, but when you error, these get thrown. You don't return this. This doesn't create an object. I don't know how I feel about that. Yeah, clearly it caught me out today. This one is the most complicated file we created today. It's the auth callback, then the name of your provider method, but we shouldn't touch it again, I don't think, even if we had a third provider or more. This should work no matter how many providers we have, because it's using methods that adhere to some interfaces. that should work for everyone. We deleted the bespoke one for GitHub because we have the one that works for everything. And we've amended the login form and therefore the login action as well. Good. And I also prettier formatted this file that Google needs to exist to verify that I actually own this domain. I actually am in control of the domain. Cool. Let's push to production and see what happens. So that's another case where you may have problems if you do the offline way with the refresh token with Google, because maybe you're testing it out in development and you've done everything perfectly and you've stored this refresh token, but then you push to production and you try to log into production, but your production database doesn't have that refresh token and Google will not give it to you again. So what do? You go to your dev database and you copy paste that refresh token, or you have to go to your Google account and see which third parties you've authorized, and then unlink the Goblin app or whatever app you have, and then go through the login flow again, and then production will get your refresh token. Very edge case problem, but keep in mind that's what happens. Maybe in the future, a lot of these things are good to get exposed at and hear about. And even if they don't make perfect sense, or if you don't think you'll ever need them before, again, in the future, because at some point you will, and then it'll be like, oh, yeah, it clicks, and it helps. So let's see. Did we break stuff? Because that's likely. I didn't pass environment variables to the playwright test actions, which I always forget to do. There is a production deployment. So let's see. Login, continue with Google. Great. It works. And I guess in production, we don't have, this header is kind of dodgy. I'll need to look into that. In production, I don't have the jmacripis@gmail.com account. Let's see if that works. New user created. Awesome. All right. So I think this is it. Feel free to click around and let me know how it works or where it doesn't. And let me know what you want to see next. As it stands, next up would be login with Magic Link, because that also ties into testing as well. Testing auth with third-party providers is tricky because you escape your website. You get out of the flow of your website, you go to GitHub, you go to Google, and then you come back and then stuff happens. So you depend on the third party to send the correct codes and all of that. It's like too many mechanisms. So I don't recommend testing the auth flow like that. This is one of the cases where like you can manually click around, and if it works, it works. But because you won't have a playwright user that has registered with GitHub, like it's not a good idea to have something like that. But the moment we provide an option like continue with Magic Link, then we have ways to capture that email going out and getting that verification code, and then kind of like faking some part of the process, because we're in control of sending the email, or we are in control to get to hitting a third party to send the email for us, like resend. Anyway, we'll show this in the future, but whenever you offer some type of social login, Unfortunately, I wouldn't test the social login itself, but I would test the login with magic email method and then hope that the social login as well works. I would have unit tests for the specific social login thingies. But the main thing, the auth flow, I would check by checking just they click the magic click button, are they logged in? Or if you have an email and password method as well, this one is not recommended because people are terrible with passwords and social engineering is like the truest way, easiest way to hack things. But if you do have that, that's also the most easily testable one because you can create a playwright user with an email and a password, maybe a new email and a password every time, and then log them in with that email you just generated and password you just generated. That's the easiest way to check the auth flow, but that's going to be only one of the ways you provide to log in, but it's better than nothing. Like, it's part of the same flow, it's one of the options. At least confirm that one works and then hope you've set things up correctly with GitHub or Google. You can have unit tests for that, but I guess my point is you have the automated test going through the email and password or magic link auth every time. And if you've manually clicked continue with GitHub once and continue with Google once, that's going to work forever so long as the other options don't work. If something in this page has broken, it will cause a red test because your magic login method doesn't work. Because this just gets you to other platforms that send you back. If you've gone through it once and this page still works, it will work forever, is what I'm saying, like 99.9% of the time. But we'll talk about this more later. That's one of the reasons why I like Magic Link Login, because it's easier to test. There are many apps like Monzo that only offer Magic Link logins, not even email and password, no nothing. You just do the magic links, and I think that's, you know, sensible. Don't have to worry about other ways, and then you just test that one and it works. But we are at the end of the episode, so I'm rambling more and more. I think this is gonna be it for today. Even though I was planning to do the magic link today, I think we spent quite a lot of time on implementing Google and refactoring. So I will come back with a vengeance on Friday, unless you want me to do something else. So plan magic links, and if you want another third-party provider, let me know which one you want to see, and testing. So that's going to be a big part. And then we can move on to actually do more stuff with the user accounts, allow people to submit their own loot, and all of those things. Hope it sounds great. Looks great. And I hope you had a lovely day and you'll have a lovely rest of the week. I'll catch you all later. Goodbye.